Well, now we get to follow up with the draft. And I think it's a really cool concept. The idea of being able to talk to other executives remaining anonymous about other teams' drafts. So naturally, we wanted to get your gauge on what was said about the Bears. What were your main takeaways?
Yeah. Generally positive. I think they can see it's a coach-driven draft at the top when you're taking two weapons like that. And maybe that's okay because your coach is the star of the show now, and he did such a great job in Detroit with the pieces he had. So there's probably a little bit of trust that, people think highly of Ben Johnson and think that if he likes a couple guys here, that he's going to be able to get the use out of them. It was interesting before the draft, some of the rankings had Ty Warren, who ended up being drafted by the Colts at 14 as the top tight end. But the people that I talked to thought it was going to be Colston Loveland, who the Bears took, just because he's more dynamic as a receiver. So I think that was generally applauded. They've thrown a lot at the receiver and tight end positions. So that's okay because they did address their offensive line quite a bit earlier this offseason. I'd say just generally pretty positive and understanding of what the Bears are doing.
Mike, the Loveland buzz has been louder and certainly more amplified after the draft than it was before the draft. What is your sense of what excites people around the league at what his potential is, obviously playing in an offense that should feature him?
Yeah, well, just the ability to get open, which isn't a given with tight ends. There's different types of tight ends. Some of them are, better blockers. Some of them are, well-rounded, pretty good at both blocking and receiving. But I think what's differentiating the guys at the top, usually, if you want to take one early, is their ability to separate and get open on their own. So people think he can do that, and that's, like I said, that differentiates him a little bit in the minds of some from the second tight in the draft, Warren. So that's what it is: ability to almost operate like a receiver from the tight end position.
I think it's also valuable when it comes to just the overall impression of, we've asked the question before, whose draft is this? And that was one where the pick was so indicative of the hallmarks of a Ben Johnson need. What was your takeaway when it came to
Yeah.
that part of this? Was not just the comments about Ben Johnson's needs specifically, but the overall draft.
Yeah, agreed. And I also think that it was a draft where by the time the Bears were picking, it wasn't like there was a no-brainer person to pick. You kind of had your choice of a lot of different things, right? You could say in some other years, even last year, it worked out a little similarly where like Joe Alt was this great tackle available and he ended up not being available by the time the Bears picked, I think, at number 9. But, if there's somebody like that, that's just a no-brainer. But if they were going to address, you know, people wanted them to get a running back. Well, there isn't really one you're going to take there, at 10. Offensive line, yeah, there were some kind of guard tackle types, but you did that in free agency. You didn't necessarily have to do that. So, I did think it set up a little bit more easily to take a piece that the coach likes as opposed to feeling like, oh my gosh, the number one corner's available. We have to get him. There weren't players like that in this draft at number 10.
Mike, on day 2, they picked Luther Burden, and it's another weapon for Ben and Caleb to utilize. There was some sentiment initially that that's a luxury pick for this team, given where they're at. And then there's this post-draft buzz that best case scenario is Luther Burden becomes a Pro Bowl difference maker for your offense for a long time. What's your sense on kind of how he's viewed and kind of the pluses and minuses of making that pick where they made it?
Yeah, yeah, I think you could find many mock drafts before the draft that had him going a lot earlier, going in the first round. So I think people are understanding of the value looks like you're getting in the second round, and think that it could be a little bit of a luxury because you've got other receivers. Now they have different skill sets, so I'm not saying he's the same as all the other receivers, but if you want the ball in somebody's hands, you could say DJ Moore could do some things after the catch as well. So I think that's a fair point to bring up. You could call it a criticism that, maybe it was a bit of a luxury pick. I think it was interesting that, the pick before that the Patriots took Travion
Yes.
Henderson, the running back. I think that's interesting. I probably could have got into that in the analysis, probably should have. But I thought what was interesting about that is that Henderson is seen as a pass protection piece, not just a runner. Really could help your pass protection. He's a great willing pass blocker. So, if both those players were available at
Yep.
that pick, you'd probably lean towards Henderson, right?
No doubt. And I think, yeah, I think there was a push to try to make that happen. And then they had to, I don't want to say settle, but, pivot, I guess is a better way to put it.
Well, and we've been trying, Mike, to figure out what the Bears' counter punch was after that, because then they go another 6 rounds before they get a running back. They go to the 7th round. So that's been a discussion that we've been having, is just the thought on if that was truly a position of need versus them talking a lot about their board.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a fair point. I mean, certainly they could have taken one earlier, but, as sometimes you really only like certain players, right? So there could be other backs that they would have been fine with, but it just didn't feel like it was adding what they wanted to add at the expense of something else they could have gotten later in the draft. Like, I think people liked they took an offensive lineman at 56. People liked that pick. That maybe if you're going to do luxury with Burden, you come back with meat and potatoes with offensive line, right?
Yeah.
So, and then we're like, okay, now we're 3 picks into this thing. We haven't taken anyone on defense. So, okay, let's get this defensive tackle, Turner, right?
Yep.
And so you can kind of see how that goes. And now, we don't like these backs that are here in this next range the same. That's how that happens.
I think also when it came to just the executive opinion, that was addressed in some of these quotes. Like, for example, when they're talking about, well, that's a lot of resources at the tight end position, that there is some acknowledgement of either perhaps some overlapping positional possible redundancy or an understanding of the availability of what was there at the draft that they wanted.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And when I look at where they were, so remember I said, like at 132, they took the linebacker. Well, at that point, a running back had come off 5 picks before. Another one had come up, 2 others had come off a couple before that. Scadaboo had come off. A lot of people liked him, special teams guys. So, that's the board falls how it falls. And if you want to make a maneuver and move up to get a guy, you're going to pay for that. And it may just not have seemed worth it to them. And I think you have to trust Ben Johnson a little bit in terms of what he has on offense, what he thinks he needs, and he got what he wanted. Clearly, they didn't pass on a running back when he wanted to have one. I would almost guarantee that.
Mike, 2-part question here. You had quoted an executive in your piece about Ozzie Trapillo saying that he could be the sleeper of this class for the Bears. I'm curious what kind of buzz you heard about what makes him that. And then on a bigger picture sort of look, when you draft a tackle in a top 60 of a draft, what have to be the realistic expectations for what he is going to be for you, for your football team for the long haul?
I think that high, you're hoping to get a starter. It may not be a starter right away, but I think you'd really like to get a starter out of that second pick, and maybe he starts, maybe it's the second year or whatever. But I think he played a lot of right tackle in Bill O'Brien's offense there at Boston College. So, I believe the Bears have Darnell Wright there, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
And so we'll see what the future is for him, and where he's going to go. But that could be, this could be a swing tackle, somebody for you. This could be, an eventual starter at right tackle, depending what you think is going to happen with Wright in terms of either changing positions or where he fits into their future on an extension, those sorts of things. You can't have enough of those guys at that position. And so if you like a guy, you take him and you work him into the mix.
Mike, I know that you've mentioned the Bears is getting high marks from this random executive pool that you talked to. But what was another team in the NFC that stood out to people as far as how they performed in the draft?
People loved the Rams getting a first-round pick next year. Sometimes those first-round picks seem really great, don't they, until you have to actually use them. But the idea of doing that when you may need a quarterback next year, I think a lot of people like that. People didn't like the other side of it with Atlanta giving that away, even though they liked some of their players. Let's see. I scrolled through some of these teams. I think people liked, you could kind of, the Giants. I think the Giants were another one as I go through this, just because the market sort of proved they were correct in not taking a quarterback at 2. There was sort of debate of like how early do they need to take a quarterback? Or at 3, I guess. They took Abdul Carter instead of kind of panicking and taking, Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart or somebody they liked at 3 because they felt like they needed to have a quarterback. So I think that was good process. And then, I don't know if Jackson Dart's going to be any good, but you at least addressed that position, got the next quarterback and somebody they obviously liked. So, and then Cam Scadaboo also was seen as an interesting pick in the 4th round, running back who could kind of almost affect your culture just by the way he plays on special teams and the energy he brings. I think that was a pick that I talked to more than one executive who was like trying, hoping that their team would have taken him.
Yep. No doubt about that. I think he was on the radar here as well. Layla mentioned earlier your QB tiers piece, and that's one of those annual summer Christmas morning pieces where you're pretty excited for it to come out. I'd imagine that even though that doesn't launch until August, you're well on your way to compiling some of this, correct?
You can't. No, you really can't start till after the draft because that's when you know who's starting in the different places, right?
Okay.
So you can't. We had to see who's going to draft quarterbacks, where's Russell Wilson going to land, all those types of things. So I think get going, a little bit here soon.
Aaron Rodgers also on that list. I'm just curious, what do you expect you might hear that'd be the first year that Caleb Williams will be folded into that? Because obviously rookies aren't eligible for it. But what do you expect to hear? What are some of your early takes on where Caleb is right now?
Probably some criticism of his first year playing and taking too many sacks, and just probably not being as good as people thought he was going to be. You could say what you want about the situation around him. And then I think there'll be talk about what Ben Johnson can do with him and how Ben Johnson is, I think Ben Johnson's a little bit of an old school coach. I think he coaches people hard and holds them accountable. So I think that'll be an interesting situation for Caleb Williams there in Chicago.
Mike, I do remember talking to you about Lamar Jackson pretty intently after the last one came out. Does anything change after this past season? Because I thought he was a tier lower.
So. Yeah, well, he was right on the edge of tier 1 and tier 2. So, I would imagine that he would bump into tier 1. I would think so after last year. Yeah.
I was curious about that. Not that I need to scoreboard anybody. Goodness knows I've been wrong on a million things. But I did wonder if his past season would put him back in that top tier.
Well, he has never been there before in tier 1. He's always been close, but I think the way he's not so much this year or even last, but the way that it hasn't translated to the postseason and has kept him and concerns about his passing in the past, kept him a little bit lower, but he really moved right to the edge of it this last year. And so I'm going to look at it. I was going to look at it now. It's not popping up, but just he was close. He had a lot of tier 1 votes. So I would think that enough of those would swing over. He'll be in tier 1 with probably Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and we'll see who else.
Mike, we look forward to it. And until then, we get to check out not only your story about executives talking about the draft, but I know one was just released, executives talking about free agency as well. So we will look forward to those. And thanks for joining us here on Rahimi and Harris on the Score.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Nice to talk to Mike Sando always, especially when there is that embarrassment of riches resource-wise there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's something you look forward to too, the quarterback tiers.
Oh yeah, it's because it's so informed, right? Like that's the best part of it is it's not Mike's rankings, right? Like Mike reaches out all over the league and gets such a wide array of opinions that help you crystallize how the entire league views all of these quarterbacks. And it's fascinating to see how it stacks up every year.
Well, and I thought that it was compelling that the Giants got such high marks for their draft after everything that happened.
Sure.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure out. Right now, they still have 4 quarterbacks in the room, right? They haven't made a move on DeVito yet, have they?
No.
Your guy.
ILL.